All right. Good morning, Buckeyes. Let's go ahead and get started. I hope you guys are doing super well, settling into our kind of new schedule, a new way of doing class. We're going to do today is get into social influence tactics, which I talked with you guys about a bit at the end of Tuesday's lecture. Again, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Again, I also think this is where you get your money back on the course if you haven't gotten it back already, where you can use these tactics to influence others and to also be very aware when they may be used on you, which would keep you then from spending all that money that you don't mean to be spending to be kind of be more effective with influencing others, especially with jobs that you have. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish talking about social influence tactics today. So we're going to cover the whole thing today, and then either get into groups today or get into groups on Tuesday, which is good for us. And then remember our first, or not our first exam, our third exam is on Thursday of next week. So keep that in mind as you're going through things, as you're kind of setting up your timeline for studying, things along those lines. We'll have that happening next Thursday. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and just kind of jump into things and get started. And then, as we're going through, make sure that you're jumping in and answering questions. You guys did a great job with that on Tuesday. Definitely want to make sure we keep that going. So when we talked about social influence tactics, we talked about this as being a great book to look at. So I just want to remind you guys of this. It's a great read. It's very helpful for you if you can get into any type of sales business or any type of kind of interacting, working with others. So definitely keep that in mind. And what we were doing was we were talking about these 6 weapons of social influence, and we got into reciprocity a little bit in terms of talking about how we want to reciprocate positive behaviors and how this is important for us. So we're going to finish kind of talking about reciprocity and ask you guys to give me some examples of that. We'll then get into commitment and consistency, scarcity, social proof, liking, and authority. So we'll keep working our way through the influence tactics, and then we'll close out today's lecture talking about how we can protect ourselves, how we can defend against some of these techniques, which is a really good thing to know because oftentimes they're used in a way that you have to be a little bit careful and mindful that they get used on you. But if you are, then you're able to kind of prevent yourself from falling in the trap that these social influence weapons kind of set up for us. So let's get back into things, and let's get back to first starting off with reciprocity. And reciprocity, again, is this obligation to return in kind what others have done for us. And this is a good thing for us. We want to reciprocate behavior. So keep in mind, this is a positive behavior for us. If someone helps you out, you want to help them back. Some of the things we talked about as being good neighbors are partly tied to the idea that if you're a good neighbor to your neighbor, they'll be good to you. So they'll reciprocate that positive behavior, help you out when you need that help. And so reciprocity is an important concept, is an important aspect of how we get along with each other. Part of the idea of reciprocity right now is that if I'm staying home, I'm trying to keep everyone safe, you're going to do the same thing. That's, everyone has to kind of reciprocate this behavior. Otherwise, it's not going to be beneficial for us. And so one of the first things we talked about was this technique of door in the face. So someone remind me what door in the face looks like. And there'll be a couple of times I want you guys to jump in over audio and give some examples, give some answers. So thinking back to only just Tuesday, what is the example of door in the face, or how would you describe it?
It was like if you ask someone for like $50 for gas and they say no, so then you come back and say, well, can I have 10? And then they'll say yes. So it's basically like making your offer more reasonable, so then they're more likely to say yes.
Okay, so I like the integration of kind of the concept, the definition, and with the example. And hopefully you guys have tried this tactic on someone who might give you money for gas. But the idea there is you make a larger request, as Emmy was saying. More than likely that request is going to be denied, but then you come back with a more reasonable request. And by coming back with a more reasonable request, in that case, then you should say, well, hey, because you're more reasonable, I'm going to agree to this. And this is where we start to see negotiations. Some might say, well, I really want a large sum of money, for my house. Then they come back with a more reasonable amount. Well, because now they've come back with a more reasonable amount, well, then I should reciprocate by entertaining this offer and being more reasonable about it. And so you guys have the right idea here. You can see this again with the idea that when you make that large request, it's something you do have to be careful that it's not totally unreasonable. Okay, so it's not like you can say, I want $3,000 for gas and then only ask for 10. And you have to make sure it's the same person in both cases, because otherwise that reciprocity isn't there. So again, we want to reciprocate, we want to be helpful with behaviors. And so we see that this is one way that we can use this influence tactic. The other way we talked about was with the example of good old Billy Mays, and the idea of that's not all. And you see this in TV commercials all the time, especially commercials kind of selling products. What's the idea behind that's not all? Okay, so kind of jump in over audio. What was the idea behind it? You can even give some examples from Billy Mays.
kind of like making the offer better, like doubling it or giving you the same, giving you more for like price, like kind of like that's not all type of
Okay.
um, things.
Okay, so perfect. You've got it. We saw Billy Mays was absolutely the king of doing this. The idea is that you're going to start off with some kind of base offer. You're going to keep adding more and more onto that to make it more attractive. And with that being said, when they do that, then the argument becomes, well, if you're adding more and more, I should be more willing to buy this. Okay, so if you said it's be $19 for 2 tubes of Mighty Putty, now I'm up to 6 tubes for the same price, and you're showing me all these things that it can do. Well, if that's the case, then hey, I really should be willing to buy this product because you keep giving me more and more of it. So I should reciprocate your positive behavior of giving me more for that same price with my positive behavior of then purchasing that. I'll share just a quick sidebar. I was playing softball in graduate school. I played a lot of softball in graduate school, and you know, I made a mess of myself, and I slid all over the place. And I said, "Oh, I just need the oxy cleaner to clean it up." And someone says, "Too soon, man, too soon." And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm just talking about like cleaning up my socks, cleaning up my clothes. He's like, you do know Billy Mays died like yesterday, right? So that's how I found out, unfortunately, when Billy Mays died, is by being too soon on jokes with Billy Mays. So he's a sensitive subject for me. But you guys have the idea. Here's the question I want to pose to you guys. Does apologies work the same way? So it's gone away a little bit, but for a while there was kind of like marketing campaigns that all kinds of companies were doing, saying, you know, we're apologize that we're not doing the best we can. I think it was Domino's said, hey, our pizza is really just bad. We're really sorry about that. But hey, we've made all these efforts to make it better. They kind of apologized and they said, hey, will you come, you know, buy our pizzas? Do you think apologies from companies work the same way with reciprocity? Do you think this is a concept of social influence that maybe you've seen with why people apologize? Okay, so definitely jump in. Give me your thoughts. This is just kind of a thought question, something I've, if I had a little more time, I'd investigate, because I think it's an interesting potential way of using reciprocity.
So my son worked for Spectrum for a while.
Okay.
And he would go from house to house, kind of, you know, selling their service. And a lot of people that he learned through his techniques, like, you know, through his upper management, that when they were really disenfranchised with either Spectrum or what used to be Time Warner, he would, right off the bat, he should apologize and say, you know, like, man, I'm, you know, sorry that you had that experience, blah, 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 and then kind of sweeten his deal.
Okay. Okay.
In kind, yeah. So definitely would offer more, you know, and then just, but right off the bat, they would apologize.
So I love you jumping in with that response. It does a lot of things in terms of thinking about it. So one is that maybe it does give support for this reciprocity idea. So, you know, if you're apologizing, say, hey, you know, sorry, things aren't going well, you know, maybe that means that, you know, there's reciprocity. We can talk about that as stealing thunder as well. So we talked about that as influencing attitudes by saying, yeah, you know, I'm going to admit that we're not doing a good job, so therefore you can't use it against me. You also see kind of the application of these social influence techniques. So going door to door is where we see it all the time. I had a friend, Eric Wesselman, tell me that a kid came up to him, was trying to sell him magazines, and he actually spent the next half an hour telling the kid how to sell magazines correctly. He's like, no, you didn't use that influence technique right. No, you have to wait until I make a counteroffer, like kind of walking him through like how this works. So it's kind of interesting thing that he did. And so what's nice too about your example, so I appreciate you jumping in, Chrissy, is that it also shows that you can combine these influence tactics as well. So we'll talk about them separately for the sake of making it easier to learn them, but you can combine these together. So you can say, okay, well, I apologize. Let me offer you something else. Or, you know, I'm going to then go through that's not all. So I apologize. Our service wasn't great, but, you know, maybe I'll give you this cable deal, but I'll tell you what, I'll add HBO for 3 months for free, just because you haven't had a good experience with us. And you do see some organizations, some companies really do apologize really quickly. You know, it's almost, unfortunately, I find it sometimes to be kind of fake, where they're like, oh, I apologize that, you know, your package didn't arrive. It's like, okay, that's part of the cue that you're supposed to say, but maybe that's part of why they use these apologies, is kind of the stealing thunder technique and the reciprocity. So great example. I appreciate you jumping in with that. So any questions with reciprocity before we'll move on to our next tactic? All right. Okay. And again, with any of these things, if you have a question, just jump in. Don't worry if you talk over each other. Don't worry if you're talking over me. We'll just all kind of accept that that's the way it works. I also have the chat box open, so if you feel more comfortable posing a question there, but jump in, guys, please, by all means. So the next concept we'll talk about here is the overarching idea of commitment and consistency. Okay, so we talked about reciprocity as our first kind of weapon of social influence. Our second one we'll talk about here is the idea that following making a commitment, individuals feel pressure to behave consistently with that commitment. Okay, so following making a commitment, individuals feel pressure to behave consistently with that commitment. And this works on a couple of principles for us. One is that we want to have consistency. Okay, so we talked about this kind of cognitive dissonance idea. If you do things that aren't aligned with your attitudes, you feel bad. Okay, so if you're trying to be a good student, you start skipping class a whole bunch, that behavior isn't aligned with your attitudes. Same thing happens here with commitment. Once you've committed yourself to a particular act, particular way of thinking, you want to do things that are consistent with that initial commitment, because that way you're all in line, your behavior is in line with your attitudes, your beliefs, and that makes you feel better about things. And so this can be used as a social influence technique where we can get someone committed to an idea, committed to a behavior, and then start to use that as a way to influence then their behavior later on by then getting them to behave in a way that was originally consistent with it. This idea here is that, sometimes you might start a class, maybe you start some kind of exercise, and you get committed to it, you find yourself kind of keep going because you want to stay consistent with that behavior. And this is where it's an influence technique in the sense that you can do things such as foot in the door. Okay, so foot in the door is this idea that you're asked for a small request, and then once upon getting agreement with that small request, you start asking for more and more. Okay, so you start increasing what you're asking for. And so this is almost kind of the opposite of door in the face. So kind of keep the two sorted between each other. But again, the idea is that we're going to ask you for something small that you're likely to say okay to. And then suddenly you find yourself doing much, much more. So I'll give you an example. I apologize, those of you that have class with me in intro to psychology, because I used this one before. But I wanted to share that my wife is absolutely the queen of foot in the door. And I have to be careful saying that because she's currently working out in the other room. So hopefully she doesn't hear. She's laughing right now, in case you guys are wondering. She's over there laughing. But she's well aware that I tell this story, and she's welcome to barge in and disagree. But she's the queen of foot in the door. This is how that sequence has gone in the past. As an example, so she'll say something like, "Hey Jim, we go down to the basement and get a can of tomatoes for making Spanish rice." So I'm not a good cook by any means, but I'm pretty good at being a sous chef. I'm pretty good at being kind of on the side and helpful with cutting things up, making kind of the basic things. So I say, sure, no problem. I'm happy to go downstairs to the basement, get that can of tomatoes, be the least bit helpful. So then I get that can of tomatoes, I come back up, and then she says, "Well, hey, will you make this Spanish rice?" I said, "Well, sure. Again, this is something I can do. I don't mind helping. That's the least I can do." She's really, done all the hard work of figuring out what we're going to eat, making sure all the groceries are in the house, which is even harder to do currently. And so, I get started with the Spanish rice, and then she might say, "Well, hey, I need to check on Evie. Do you mind, browning the ground beef because we're making tacos?" Well, okay, sure. Like, I'm already there standing in front of the Spanish rice. I want to help out. I want to be a good husband, want to be a good dad. And so finally this starts to evolve where she's like, "Well, hey, why don't you go ahead and just kind of finish the meal up? Maybe I'll cut the vegetables for you, but you go ahead and take care of all that other stuff." And in this case, tacos are one of the few meals I am pretty decent at making. So I say, sure, no problem. Now, if we back that up, it may not sound like much. But remember, I went from just going downstairs, spending just a minute to get a can of tomatoes, to now all of a sudden, making almost all of the meal. Okay, committing myself to doing that, something I hadn't planned on doing. And it all works because of the fact that I originally committed to being helpful for her. Okay, being committed to, helping with makes at least part of the dinner, going through the dinner. Now that commitment got escalated as she made bigger and bigger requests. Okay, so we see this in terms of other examples. The book will reference where salespeople will call the wife of the house and asking, "Hey, can we do a demonstration? Can we come catalog things that are in your house, supplies that are in your house?" And if they originally agree with the first request, they're then more reasonably likely to agree to the second request of many people coming in and spending 2 or 3 hours cataloging all the products they have, versus if someone just shows up and asks, hey, can I come in and catalog these products you have, people are less likely to comply with it. So what I want you guys to do is think for just a moment. Think of an example maybe where someone has used foot in the door on you, or maybe you've used it on someone else, because it's a very common tactic to be used. So think of an example. It might be something that someone's done to you. It could also alternatively be someone, a case that someone, or an example, I should say. So maybe it's something that you've had done to you, you've used, or maybe an example. So I kind of want to hear what you guys have for examples here. Okay, so again, kind of looking for, maybe it was a time that someone used this on you, maybe used it on someone else, or just kind of example that you can think of.
An example of when I used it on my mom, I was
Yeah, always have to be careful using it on your mom, by the way. But anyways.
I was going on a scuba diving trip, and basically, like, I was just gonna buy the bare minimum that I needed for scuba gear, but then when we were there, I wanted everything. So I was like, well, if we're already getting this, why don't we just get this and this? And also the other day when I was getting a new bike, my mom just wanted to get new tires, and I was like, if we're already spending the money, why don't we just get a new bike?
Okay, so I especially love that second example, because I think that happens as well, especially kind of with car repairs. Well, if you're already putting this much money into getting new tires on it, why not do, why don't we, get a new car, things like that. So I love that example. I think that works well. Other ones that you guys can think of. Again, I want to kind of highlight this one because I think it's really kind of a tactic if you're not paying attention to. It's pretty easy to use.
This happens to me because our laundry is in our basement,
okay.
And my mom will say, hey, can you go get me this or whatever? And then the next thing I know, I'm like throwing in laundry, and then I'm like folding laundry, and then I'm taking like not like others upstairs. I'm like, how did this happen?
I feel like I want to do research at some point, like if it's part of becoming like a mom, that you just get better at this influence tactic. Like it just suddenly becomes like, it's like inherent with like being a mom that you now know how to like exactly use this. Because I've tried and it doesn't work at all. I can't get it to work at all when I try it. So maybe it's tied to being in the mom role. Any other examples you guys can think of? These are great ones. All right, so again, this is one that you see. We'll talk about another commitment and consistency, and this is the idea of a lowball technique. And this is, again, where I'll get your money back on the class, because you can identify when this lowball technique is being used on you. And the idea behind this is that you say that you're interested in, let's say, some type of item. So you're interested in something, and then what you find out is that there's more and more costs that are added onto it. Okay, so we can think about this first as an example. You're interested in buying a particular product. Let's go ahead and just say it's a car. We'll pick on car salesmen a little bit today, so just because we see a lot of tactic going on there. And they say, okay, well, hey, here's this car. It's going to cost you $11,000. You say, okay, I like this car. I want to buy this car. And then what we see is that afterwards, though, they start to say, well, hey, if you want to get these rims that are on the car, you're gonna have to add another $1,000. Those are optional rims that usually we take off. Or hey, if you want to have a steering wheel, that's another $500. Or hey, if you want to have windows on your car, that's another $1,000. The idea there is that they get you locked into the original idea of purchasing that item, and then they add more and more costs to it. And in adding more and more costs, you still stay committed to the original idea, but now they're influencing you to stay along with that commitment. And in doing so, now you're spending more than maybe you would have. Okay, or the other kind of thing that might happen with lowball technique is they say, hey, come volunteer for just an hour. Maybe this has happened to you guys, happened to me. So you come volunteer for just an hour, and then suddenly you find that they say, well, hey, we're getting together, we're staying a little bit longer. Can you stay a little bit longer? Or hey, you're willing to kind of volunteer and do the simple things. Suddenly you find yourself doing some kind of really complex task. Okay, so sometimes I go into situations going, hey, I'm just going to do kind of what's helpful, but suddenly I find myself kind of being the leader in charge of doing different things, kind of giving instructions to others. And I found that kind of lowball technique of, hey, just come help out, suddenly starts to turn into something bigger once people kind of push you in that particular direction. So again, it works on this idea that we want to be committed. We want to be consistent so that once we agree to something, we want to keep staying with it. But in this lowball, they're kind of artificially setting it up. They're getting you committed to one thing and then tacking on additional aspects to that request.
Okay, so I feel like I'm going to get these two ideas confused because the low ball sounds very similar to the foot in the door.
Yeah, so they're both working on that same commitment principle. So that's probably in part why it is you're seeing it as being similar. Foot in the door kind of tends to be a little bit more smaller requests, kind of building up to a bigger one. Low ball is kind of the idea that they're going to set you up with what you want, you get committed to it, but then they add more cost to it. So the extent that that foot in the door costs you more, it has a similar principle to it. But the low ball is really kind of designed to really say like, hey, I'm going to give you an offer, get you committed to that offer, and then tack on more to it. Versus the foot in the door is a little more, okay, we're going to go step by step to increase you to something larger later on. Does that help clarify things? And this is a great question. Jump in with these things. Does that kind of make the two separate from each other? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just want to double check this.
Yeah, no, thank you.
That's where we lose the stuff in the classroom. I can usually see like the nodding heads and get a sense of it. Now I kind of just see, faces on the screen, if nothing else. Okay. So let's continue on with other commitment and consistency, and then I'll stop. We'll kind of get a couple examples of these, clarify things. Okay. Another one that involves commitment and consistency is bait and switch. And the idea behind bait and switch is that it does have similar ideas and principles to the ones that we were talking about, where they're going to get you committed to an original idea. Okay. What they're then going to do is they're going to switch you over to something else. Okay, so something that they want you to do. So the classic example of this, the one that I love the most, related to bait and switch, is when Black Friday sales come around, and they say, "Hey, get out really early in the morning. We've got 80-inch TVs for $1." Okay, that's a little bit stretching it, but the idea being that they have this really good deal, and so you get out really early in the morning, and you find out there was exactly 2 of those TVs that were purchased within 30 seconds of the store opening, and you're not going to get those TVs. So now what they're going to do is they're going to switch you over to a different product. Well, hey, you can't get that really, really great deal, but here's a 70-inch TV for $1,000, or maybe something that's still a good deal, but not nearly as good as that first one. And so a lot of those sales, especially on Black Friday, are really kind of bait and switch. You might see it where they say, hey, why don't you come and look at this car? And they say, well, I'm sorry, actually this car, someone just called and said, hey, this is no longer available. The person's buying it. Let me switch you over to this other car that's kind of similar. Okay, so again, picking on car sales just because they kind of have the most easy examples, but there are very good car salesmen that aren't using these techniques in harmful ways. So again, this bait and switch gets you committed to the original idea, and then works on that consistency principle. If you like the original idea, that you're gonna be willing to then switch over to something else. Okay? I'll keep going with these, and then I'll kind of pause and ask you guys to give examples of this. So as I'm talking about them, think of examples of any of these. We can kind of go back through all of them together. Here's, in fact, absolutely my favorite technique, which is a labeling technique. And the idea behind a labeling technique is that you're going to label someone, and they're going to start acting in a way that's consistent with that. So I use it a lot, intro to psychology, to kind of get students motivated. I say, well, you guys seem like you're really good at preparing, getting ready for exams, really committed to doing well. Hence, I'm labeling them that they're going to do well on exams, with the hopes that that then causes them to stay consistent with that label and make sure that they study and prepare for exams. I also do this quite a bit with Evie. Hopefully she can't hear me in the other room. She's also hanging out there, where I'll say, hey, you're really good at picking up, or hey, you're a really good reader. Let's sit down and read a book. The idea there is that I'm going to give her the idea that she's a good reader, and then I'm going to hope that she's going to behave in a way that's consistent with that. So by behaving in a way that's consistent with that, now I'm getting her to do something that I want her to do. I happen to be giving this lecture when our projector at Purdue didn't work. And at Purdue, we used to have what we called the monkey. So it was basically a computer stand that could be rolled around. So it's a kind of a large TV that was hooked up to a computer. A lot of times we just grabbed the monkey if something happened in the classroom and it didn't work. And so what I did is I told the students before, my friend who was the tech that was going to walk in, I was like, when he walks in, I want you guys to give him a round of applause. But I knew if I just told students, hey, give him a round of applause when he walks in, I get kind of a half-hearted response at all, people just being obedient. So what I did is I said, hey, guys, you seem like a really fun class. It's kind of always up for a good joke. a good friend of mine is going to be bringing the monkey in. When he comes through the door, I want you to give him a standing ovation. He'll think it's hysterical. And sure enough, everyone in the classroom, right on cue, couldn't have been any more perfect, stands up and starts giving a round of applause to Alex coming in with the monkey. And so again, that's where that labeling technique came in. I said, hey, you guys are fun. I gave them something to be consistent with, committed to, and then gave them the action that I wanted them to do, a chance to demonstrate being fun by giving him that round of applause. Yes, that's where I use that labeling technique. And again, this is another one, you might say, hey, you're a really smart consumer. It looks like you're, really smart about how you're going to buy these objects, how you're going to buy these items. Let me talk with you about kind of some of the aspects of them that'll kind of help you make a decision. And from there, I can then start giving information that's consistent with how I want them to buy it, because now I'm getting them to think critically about that item that they're buying. Let me add one last influence technique related to commitment and consistency. Then what I'm going to do is stop and kind of answer any questions you guys have and ask you guys to generate a bunch of examples for this. So the last one we have with commitment and consistency is what we call legitimization of paltry favors. Okay, so legitimization of paltry favors. And the idea here is that I'm going to make a small, reasonable request where I'm just going to ask, hey, can you just do something? Okay, so you might have heard, can you give a donation? Even $1 will help. Okay? Anything that you're able to give would be great. The idea there is that gets you in a position where you're thinking about trying to be committed to it, that there's not a lot of commitment to it. You don't have to give a lot. But then your behavior will be consistent with that small commitment. Where you say, okay, well, hey, if you're only asking for a penny, then, well, hey, I'm committed to the idea of being a good person and helpful to others. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just maybe $1. Okay, so I'm kind of building this idea of being helpful. You might think of this as, hey, will you do me just a small favor and let me know what happened in class today? Okay. That's just a small thing. You're not asking for the notes. You're not asking for a whole bunch. But the person who you're making that request from might say, well, hey, you just wanted information. Let me give you the notes. Or, hey, I'll walk you through the entirety of what we're going to be doing in class. Okay, so you might find that happen sometimes. You're just like, hey, just give me a quick summary of class. And because it's just a small thing, suddenly you find that your classmate's giving you this big summary. They're telling you a whole bunch of information. So again, the idea behind all this is that you're setting up this idea of you can commit to an idea, and then guiding that behavior of that person so that they act in a way that's consistent with that commitment. In some cases, it's trying to kind of bring out the good parts of them. Sometimes it's kind of you're using it to your own advantage. Okay, so I've given us lots of commitment and consistency influence tactics. Let me pause at this point to see what questions you have and to get some of your examples. So there might be examples, again, you've used, they've been used on you, or examples that kind of come to mind. Okay, so I'm gonna pause for a little bit, let you guys kind of jump in again with questions and examples. And if you have an example, share with us which technique you're thinking about. And let's get 3 or 4 or 5 responses here.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So the example I thought of for the legitimization of paltry favors is I asked a friend for to take a picture of a page of a book that I didn't have yet for class, and she ended up sending me the whole chapter. And that was really nice of her, but it's more than what I asked for, and it was really helpful. So that was the first thing that popped in my mind about it.
Okay, so I think that's a great example. Again, that commitment of, hey, can I have just a little bit of something? And then, well, if they just wanted that page, it's not that much more to give you, the whole chapter. Okay, so that works really well. I think it's a great example. I will steal that down the road, sorry. It's now recorded that I said I would steal it, so it doesn't count when I say it. Other questions or examples? Again, let's get a few of these examples. I love applying, one of the things I love about this section is you can apply it to so many different instances. So I want to drum up a couple examples here.
An example of lowball would be when you're going to a concert, because you'll be like, oh, I'm willing to spend $100 on the seats, but then you end up spending $150 with all the fees and stuff.
Okay, so that's a great example. I love that. So, hey, I'm committed to this, $75 ticket, but then Ticketmaster has a surcharge, and there's taxes on top of it, and then there's a shipping and handling for some weird reason sometimes. And then you get there, and it's $15 of parking. And then, if you get there and you want to get kind of you can upgrade to a slightly better seat, for a couple more. You're right, absolutely. A lot of these events are set up for this kind of low ball where you don't see what the eventual cost is. I actually pay close attention to this when I buy items online, because you see lots of kind of hidden costs that get picked up on it. So great example again. I should just let you guys, steal these, or, teach this section. I'll just steal your examples. Okay, other examples.
The bait and switch, like technique.
Okay, perfect.
So my dad is a manager at a car dealership. And
Okay.
so he doesn't actually sell cars, but he has to like mark them as sold, like if one of his employees sells a car.
Uh-huh.
And there was an instance where it didn't get marked as one of the cars didn't get marked as sold in the system.
Okay.
And it was like a custom car that this lady like requested, and like it was like all like custom interior and like all of the amenities were custom. And since it wasn't marked as sold, my dad actually sold that car to another. I'm sorry if you guys just heard my cat.
Hey, you know what? What's funny is everyone keeps talking, if like you're watching Facebook, like how it's like students and pets.
Yeah, I know. She's
Like
being loud.
I'll tell you what, we have a lot to get through, but like the Tuesday after exam, we'll make it like pet day. Like you just bring your pets in, like they can kind of hang out. We'll introduce our pets, like, so we'll do that next time. But no, don't worry about these kind of things, guys. So keep going, please. You have a great example.
But so he actually ended up selling that custom car to another dealership because he didn't know that it was sold.
Okay.
And so obviously that was like a huge deal, and it was like a really nice car. And so then that dealership had a customer who was interested in the car.
Okay.
And so they had to like figure out a way to get both of the customers happy because it was sold to two different people at two different dealerships.
Okay.
So it ended up working out. They offered the other person at the other dealership the same car, but like not as like custom made, and it worked out. But that was obviously accidental, but it was still bait and switch.
Okay, so you can see that that's something that happens both, accidental sets up. In this case, we're talking about more as an intentional influence technique, but you can see again that kind of bait and switch where someone thinks that they're getting this car and suddenly you're switch them over to something else. And in this case, your dad and others are kind of being very fair about it, not trying to do that. I'll tell you guys a case where this technique specifically wasn't used, but they were using one they were lying to me. And so we'll talk about that. But great example. I appreciate that one. Other examples?
I kind of use labeling to my advantage sometimes.
Okay.
So like on days that we don't have school, I typically work at night, but
okay.
I would rather get it. Oh, let me let this dog out.
I feel like the dogs know where the cameras are. They're like, they want to be celebrities in the whole thing. Like they're getting adjusted to this whole scenario too. They're like, why does my human just keep sitting in front of the computer all day long? Yeah.
But on days that like I'd rather go in early and just get my shift done and over with.
Okay.
So typically the person I switch with, she's more of like a night person, and I'll always like call her or text her and be like, I know you prefer working at night and you like more of like the night people and you just like really like the night shift. I was wondering if you would like switch me. And it works. It works.
And that's perfect, kind of setting them up. You might say, well, hey, it seems like you're really flexible. You don't mind helping people out, suddenly then you give them a request to help out. Okay. Same kind of thing with like, hey, you're a really good reader. You seem like you really want to work on things. Hey, let's read, suddenly you're kind of introducing that. Okay. Great examples. Let's get one more before we go on.
I have a paltry favor example of the men and women who stand on corners of like with lights, the charity newsies or the firefighters and their boots.
Okay.
I feel like, I'm always happy to give to the first to the first one that I stop at, and then feel committed to have to try to give to everyone thereafter, like for that day or the weekend. But get a little irritated by it. Still feel like I have to go through with the commitment to show my kids a good example or whatever.
Right.
So like I don't want to, so every little bit helps, and it kind of adds more to it every time for me.
So I think it's great. Again, you see kind of that combination of that legitimization of paltry favor. You don't mind giving that donation to the first person. They're asking just kind of for maybe just a little bit out, but then it starts to become that commitment. So like, oh, suddenly now every stoplight that I see this at, I have to do this. But that's also too where I think you kind of highlight that you start to see the technique being used and it loses strength. And we'll talk about that when we talk about defending against these instances of social influence, where suddenly you realize, okay, this is a drive that's going on right now. I'm going to see these guys at every corner. I don't need to give money every time I stop to see them. Okay, so great example. Any others before we move on? I want to make sure we capture one if you had one that you thought of. All right, so we've done reciprocity, we've done commitment. Here's another one that I also especially love, which is the idea of scarcity. And with scarcity, the idea here is that rare opportunities are seen as more valuable than plentiful opportunities. So this idea is that if something's a unique experience that you can have, if it's a one-off, it's seen as more valuable and therefore more influential. As someone who likes watching kind of YouTube videos on people repairing cars, you see them finding more and more rare, unique cars to repair, or they get greater number of likes if they're repairing a car that's really kind of rare and unique. I had an experience with mini helmets where I wanted to get an Ohio State helmet. I knew that they were out of circulation. They've been out of circulation for quite some time. And so when I found one, and I found it for several times more than it would have cost originally, I was like, well, I have to buy this because it was kind of rare and distinct. And in fact, it's gone up in value because it comes more and more rare. And so again, these rare opportunities start to seem as kind of more valuable than these plentiful opportunities where they're all around. And you see this happening kind of all the time with scarcity, where they're trying to highlight this aspect. Okay, so you might see things where you're saying, seeing others say that this is rare, or there's a limited number of these. The idea here is trying to say that, hey, these are unique. Because they're unique, they're more valuable. So we'll give a research example. Participants pulled cookies out of a cookie jar that either had only a few cookies left or a jar that was pretty plentiful. So there's many, many cookies left in the jar. And what they found is that when it was only that last couple of cookies, that participants said that they tasted better, that they enjoyed them more compared to if there was a lot of cookies left. Okay, so, if you want to get that last bite of whatever dish that you're sharing, suddenly that bite tastes that much better compared to that first bite because it's rare. We see this especially with limited number techniques. We'll see this especially in American culture where there's desire to be individualistic, where they'll say, well, hey, there's only 100 of these going out. Okay, so, suddenly that, because there's a limited number, you think that they're more valuable. So you see this, one of the things I've noticed recently is kind of this first launch editions. So they'll take sports cars and they'll have a launch edition where there's only a certain number made. They're the very first ones to come out, and people will spend so much more money over the sticker price just to get that launch edition, even though the regular car will be coming out maybe only 1 or 2 weeks after that time, but it's a limited number. Okay, and we get very interested in that. So that becomes something that becomes more influential for us. We also see it too in this kind of going fast, this fast approaching deadline. This idea that you only have kind of a limited amount of time to make this decision. Okay, so I was actually talking with one of my research assistants, and he was selling his house. And what I thought was really interesting is that the seller put a deadline on it. Usually it's the buyer, the buyer put a deadline on it. So usually it's the seller that says, well, hey, you have to make a decision if you're buying my house in the next 24 hours. In this case, it was odd because it was actually the seller that did it. Okay, so they basically said, hey, here's our offer. It expires by 8 o'clock today. You have to make this huge decision on if you're going to sell this house because this deadline is going to go by quickly. Okay, so we start to see that because there's a limited time, that starts to have greater influence. And we also see this too with this idea of something only being available for a limited time only. Okay, so I think this is kind of the classic influence technique that we see kind of all the time where, hey, this is an item that's only seasonal. So one of my favorite things for the longest time was red velvet Pop-Tarts. Okay, so I used to be like a Pop-Tart fiend. I had like all the different flavors down. I knew where to like find like the secret hidden ones and like online. It was bad. It was getting to like addiction level. And one of my favorites was red velvet Pop-Tarts, and they'd only come out during Valentine's Day. So whenever Katie went to the grocery store, I'd be like, bring 10 boxes home, bring 10 boxes home. She'd keep bringing these home, knowing that they'd go away. And sure enough, very smartly, Pop-Tarts said, well, hey, people are buying these. Let's not limit them anymore. Let's make them just kind of a regular flavor. And sure enough, you guys are probably guessing where I'm going with this, that suddenly they weren't that interesting to me. And now I could get them all the time. They still tasted good, but I wasn't that infatuated with them. In fact, I stopped eating them. In fact, I stopped eating Pop-Tarts entirely. And I don't even know if they are around anymore. I will say I don't think red velvet Oreos came back out this year. At least I missed it. But those are also kind of a limited run situation. So again, it still goes back to this basic idea of scarcity where something's limited. I'll give you kind of 2 other examples that I want you guys to generate a few here. And again, that's partly why I love talking about this, is that you can see the examples. So when we bought our house, we saw it on a Friday. I think it was basically the first day it was showed, first or second day it was shown. And they basically were like, this house is going to go fast. And so literally our agent was like, do you want to put an offer in today? And this was the first time we were buying a house. So our eyes were just like, oh my gosh, like how can this be happening? Like we're first time buyers and we're doing this. And so for us, we ended up taking that night, coming back, walking through the neighborhood, checking it out. But we did put an offer in that next day. Within hours of our offer going in, another one went in. So in fact, they had a backup offer to our offer. But it showed that they were working on the scarcity. The car salesman one that I'll share is one that they also use this kind of scarcity. And this is where I didn't appreciate it. And you can see kind of the defense mechanism kicking in. I walked into a car dealership. I was interested in looking at a Subaru Outback, or a Subaru Forester, I should say. And the gentleman, hangs up the phone and says, oh, well, I just want to let you know, someone's getting their credit check to be able to buy that car. So I don't know if it's going to be available, but, in fairness, you're here. So, if you want to buy it, if you're interested in it, we can work out a deal. And instantly at that point, I was like, first off, you messed with the wrong person, because I study social influence techniques. Second off, that's not good business, man. And sure enough, I didn't stay there very long. I think I drove the car out, found I didn't like it, and left pretty quickly because it wasn't. They were using these influence tactics in a harmful way. So again, picking our car salesman just because these kind of things happen. And it doesn't happen very often, but the case being here, you can see they're trying to drum up that scarcity, that this car wasn't going to last that long, that if I didn't make a decision right there and then, this other person who had already said they wanted to buy it and they were just going through the credit process was going to get this car. So let me pause at this point, see what questions you guys have, and I definitely would love to get a few examples of these, because I think it happens all the time. It's probably something you don't necessarily even realize it's happening because of how often it occurs. Okay, so I'll give you guys a chance to give kind of 3-4 examples. You guys have done a great job with this.
So an example, I live in Johnstown,
Okay.
and so we don't have a lot of like food options, or like there's just not a lot here besides like if you go to like New Albany or like Alexandria, but or Granville. But without driving, like we have Wits, and that's like in terms of like ice cream or like sweets, that's all we have. And so they have like the flavor of the week, and I feel like it's only available for a limited time, like it's only for the week. And so I feel like everybody like goes nuts. But then at the end of the week, they always have like the leftover stuff in quarts, and I feel like nobody ever buys it in quarts. Like when they can buy it in bulk, they don't. But like when they can go in and get it, I feel like they're more likely to buy it. But then when it's not in quarts anymore, like I drove by the other day, and like every time I drove by, I was by myself. So like I don't know, I didn't want to get ice cream by myself.
I don't know what's wrong with that. That sounds good to me.
But the flavor of the week was banana, and then it was in quarts, and I was like, man, like I should really get a quart of it since I didn't get to try it during the week. And then I just didn't get it, and now it's gone. So
and see, that's another great example. You guys do an awesome job with these. So all of a sudden that one flavor sounds that much better than the others, and you don't really know how scarce it is until they put the quarts out, right? And you can even think about it to some degree, they're making a mistake because they're just dumping all these quarts out, right? They're just putting all these in. If they only had kind of one or two that were there,
more popular,
they probably go through it faster because people think, oh my gosh, I missed out on it when they were serving it. Now there's only 1 or 2 quarts. I better get this. So if you want to go back and tell Wits that, and then tell them they should hire you for their as a consultant, then you can probably get like free ice cream or something like that. I'll chime in. A couple of people commented, I love this Shamrock Shakes at McDonald's. So you see they are the king of scarcity. Everything kind of runs. You can get the McRib. Like if you had the McRib all the time, no one would buy it. But suddenly when it like pops up, you have to have it. The extra stuff, Oreos, pumpkin everything in the fall. People like campaign and wait for like the different Starbucks drinks to come out, almost like marks different seasons. The Reese's eggs around Easter time. I definitely agree with that one. That's when I fall prey to. So suddenly we have an abundance of those sitting around our house, which I have no complaints about, mind you. So other great examples have been coming through in chat. Other examples you guys can think of.
Sorry.
You
can
go.
I already talked. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Thanks. An example I thought of was like how I used to be obsessed with Thin Mints, the Girl Scout cookies, because you only get them like once a year or whatever. But then I found that the off-brand, like Keebler or whatever, they sell like an off-brand at the store year-round that tastes just like it. So now when Girl Scout season came around, I was just like, I don't really need them.
Okay, so you can see, and Girl Scout season, they're taking advantage of the scarcity. Okay, so in this case, they're getting undermined by others who are selling a similar product, but otherwise you think, oh, I have to get, the Thin Mints or whatever it is, at that time, otherwise it's going to go by. So that's where you see kind of this mass buying going on. Okay, so another great example. Okay, someone else was trying to jump in.
I was just gonna say the Reese eggs reminded me, like, at least like without the Reese's eggs, like you can still get like a Reese cup. But during Easter time, I love the Cadbury eggs. Like I'm obsessed with those.
Yeah, several people are nodding their heads. Yeah.
And you literally, like, I mean, at least like I can never find them unless it's around this time. Like no form of, I mean, I'm sure like if I got on like Amazon or something, I could order them. But like in terms of going to the store, I never find them. So around Easter time, like I just buy bags and bags and bags of them.
Okay. And again, it's that scarcity. If they were around all the time, you probably have the same kind of Pop-Tart effect I had. You wouldn't be that interested. Or, if it were that easy to just order them from Amazon, you'd figure that out. It suddenly have less appeal. And you'll see that larger companies can do this. They can have kind of limited items that are coming up only during certain times of the season. Okay. So you guys have done a great job with these examples of scarcity, but keep your eyes kind of peeled for these things because they happen all the time. And we'll talk about how you can defend against scarcity. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about our next concept, which is social proof. And this is one that I think happens all the time. I think it's become an even bigger influence. So the idea behind social proof is we view behavior as correct, okay, to the extent that in a given situation, others perform it. Okay, so we view a behavior as correct in a given situation to the degree that we see other people as performing it. So here's an example. I think this one is hysterical. In April 2007, the Washington Post convinced Joshua Bell, a famous violin virtuoso, to play in the Washington, D.C. subway during morning rush hour. So he takes a $3.5 million Stradivarius violin. He's a classically trained violinist, and he goes down and plays in the subway. And what he finds is that no one really stops, no one really notices, no one really gives him any money other than the one person who recognized who he was. And that's all because people are kind of looking around going, well, no one else is giving money, even though this is probably a beautiful piece played on this amazing instrument, in this unique situation. No one's providing any information because they're looking around to see how others are acting. Okay, again, that informational influence. Well, if no one else is giving this person money, well, it must be because they know something I don't know. And so we see this idea of social proof happens not only in this case, but we'll kind of jump ahead to other examples with things like giving tips or looking at ratings online. So how many of you have gone on Amazon and then part of the way that you purchase the item is how many stars they get and how many people have liked it or given stars? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. You can kind of raise your hand. It's something we all do. So I do this all the time. I'll key in on our product. I'll say, hey, how many people have liked this? What ratings do they give it? And if there's a high enough rating with enough people saying it, I just buy it. Okay, especially if it's something that I'm not super concerned about, maybe I'm in a hurry about. And so that's where we see this idea of social proof, where if others are believing that it's positive, okay, or others are giving information on it, well, you're going to go with that because you believe that they're right. Okay. Same thing happens with tip jars. So for those of you working in industry where you give tips, you might have had others suggest that you salt the tip jar. Okay, salt in the tip jar basically means instead of leaving an empty jar there and waiting for someone to put money in, you put in a few bucks of your own. And the idea behind that is that people are going to look at that tip jar and say, okay, well, others are giving money. That must mean that I should follow along. I'm also going to put money in as well. This is a good server, or a good bartender, or a good stylist, whatever the situation might be for tips. So that's something you can do. Is the idea is you can take advantage of the social proof and look around. And we see this again with selling items on Amazon. We'll see it all the time with kind of advertisements. You say this item's been bought by 1 million people, and they'll almost even say like, well, if it's bought by 1 million people, it can't be bad, can't be wrong. You can't be wrong to go with this product. Or you'll see this is #1 rated children's comedy for kids under the age of 6. Okay, so they found like the most narrow window they could, but they could show how, well, hey, others are watching this movie, so maybe you want to watch it as well. It's a good movie. Okay, so the idea here is you kind of keep kind of building on this idea that others are enjoying this, others like this item. It must be that something's good about it. So you see this in kind of reviews too. Someone might put up all these reviews that are positive about their particular project, trying to convince you that if other people think it's a good product, then you should like it as well. You should go along with it. Again, building kind of on this informational influence. Let me talk about liking, and then I'll pause to kind of pick up questions or examples of both of these. So kind of getting us moving just a little bit faster here. I'm a little behind, sorry guys. Okay. So liking is the idea that we're persuaded by people we like. Okay. So in this case, we're talking about people we like. It could be in mood, so you have a similar mood to them. It could be that they're similar to you. So when I went to buy our SUV when Evie was born, the person who sold me the car was about the same age as me. They actually had just had a newborn as well. And as soon as that information came out when we were on the test drive, I knew I was buying a car from this person. Okay. Just that fact that we were so similar to each other and the way that we connected on so many different levels, maybe just basically say, well, I can't say no to myself. You know, if I'm basically selling the car to myself because he's exactly the same as me, you know, I can't say no to that. And I see this happen all the time when people are selling items to me. They'll find some way to be similar to me. Okay, so, you know, I'll tell them I'm an Ohio State professor. They'll try to find some connection that they have to Ohio State to then connect that to me. Okay, even in some cases, really outlandish connections. The example I have here is a Tupperware party. How many of you have gone to a Tupperware party, kind of been roped into something similar to that? You know, maybe heard about it. The idea behind the Tupperware scheme is that rather than having a salesperson in a store try to sell this item to you, we're going to have someone that you like, someone who's similar to you sell it. Okay, so, you know, your friend down the road who also is a mom, you know, also has kids, who's busy, is trying to sell you this product that they think is going to make your life easier because it's made their life easier. And so they have these Tupperware parties because basically you're more persuaded by people that you like. And so we might as well just sell this product to other people. So that's where we start to see some of these kind of schemes going on. So, you know, the mom, you know, tries to sell it to other ones. Someone jumped in kind of jewelry parties. That's another great example. I appreciate that share. You know, again, someone, you know, sharing products they have. Sensi is another one. So, you know, hey, do you want to buy this from someone who's very similar to you? Okay, someone else is trying to kind of have a side hustle, who's interested in these kind of products. You know, you're trying to sell it that way. It's going to be much more effective than, hey, you come into a store and I'm trying to sell it to you. Okay, where I'm not really. Gift bags is one. Candle parties, those are also other examples, again, where you're trying to kind of sell it directly to someone else who's very similar to you, knowing that that's more effective. Okay? And we're more persuaded by people that we like. Okay? We comply with requests from people that we like. Okay, so liking in terms of not only are we similar to them, but also in terms, do we like that person? Okay, so I've had salespeople I've worked with where I just didn't like them. We just didn't get along well. Other times where we had kind of a great relationship, you know, we're making a lot of jokes, things where I see salespeople trying really hard to make sure that, you know, they like them. We're more likely to go along with requests from people we like. This is kind of very simple, basic human behavior. They're more influenced by that. We see too that we like people, or more persuaded, I should say, by people who are physically attractive. Okay, this goes back to this halo effect that we've talked about before, that if someone's attractive, it must mean that everything around them is good. And if everything around them is good, and they say, hey, you should buy this product, well, it must mean that that product is good too. Okay, so again, think about advertising, thinking about marketing. That's why you see attractive individuals all the time selling products. Okay, so they might have a supermodel selling a car. Well, that supermodel may have no expertise on that car, but because they're attractive, the viewer thinks, well, hey, an attractive person wants this car or likes this car, which means that I probably should like it as well. Okay, be influenced by it. Again, similarity, this is the one that I hinted at before. The more people are seen as kind of being similar to us, the more we're going to be likely to influence by them. Okay, maybe it's because we can see things from their vantage point because it's similar to ours. Maybe it's because we don't want to reject essentially ourselves. I don't want to reject the guy who also has a newborn at home, who's also freezing cold, happy the winter we have the polar vortex. You know, this person's just like me. I don't want to say no to someone who's just like me. One of the examples the book highlights is Joe Girard's example. He's the world's best car salesman. He used to send out messages, postcards to his customers, basically just saying, I like you. And the idea here is he's giving a compliment. Now, the compliment can be helpful, but it also has to be seen as legitimate. Okay, so you can't force the compliment. It has to be something that, you know, you see as legitimate. Okay, so saying, oh, it's been fun working with you, but mean that. Okay, versus, you know, the first 2 seconds into an interaction, you know, the salesperson says, "Oh, it's great working with you." Well, you know that you're just kind of saying that to compliment me. The next piece we'll talk about here related to this form of influence, okay, is this idea of contact. And so one way that we establish kind of liking as an influence technique with contact is that the more we're in contact with someone else or some item, the more likely we are to like that item. Okay, so for the longest time, we would see that companies would let people take cars home with them. So it's a great strategy. Say, hey, we'll give you a 3-day trial with this car. Just take it home with you. Okay, we often ask dealers if we could take the car to our mechanic to have the mechanic check it out. And that was always a smart move on the part of the salespeople, because now we're taking this car, we're driving it down the highway for an hour, we're parking it in our own garage. Now we can kind of envision ourselves having it. And because we've been in contact with that item more, the more that we're going to like it. Okay, and again, probably works on the same principle that you have to like it to begin with, but the more we're in contact with it, the more positive we feel towards it. So let me pause at this point to pick up any questions that you have and examples too. You guys are doing a great job with both of liking and social proof. So either questions you have or examples that you can come up with where either you've used this tactic, it's been used on you, or just kind of general examples of either liking working or this idea of social proof. So I'll pause here.
I don't know if this really falls under social proof, but I think it does. Like,
Okay.
the whole like toilet paper situation right now.
All right. Okay. So how so?
Everybody started buying toilet paper, and like one person did it and like bought a whole store full of toilet paper, and then the next person, like, all you see is like these carts full of toilet paper.
Okay.
And now they're which I
Okay.
guess also falls like under scarcity too, but I thought of it during social proof.
So brilliant answer. So you're tapping into kind of probably why toilet paper is going so fast, is it's based on 2 dimensions. Suddenly there's this social proof. Oh shit, like, you know, I should get toilet paper because everyone else is. And that pun was intended if you caught it. Okay. Okay. So the idea is like, okay, yeah, you know, I need to get this toilet paper because that must mean that when these kind of things happen, if others are doing it, you know, it must mean that this is an item that we need to have. Okay. Gets at that kind of informational influence as well. So, you know, if others are buying this, they must know something I don't know. Some of the people down in kind of Florida where they get hurricanes and stuff are just laughing because they go through this preparation all the time every year. When I was down in Florida, there was a certain time where everyone just kind of bought these things to have them. And they would just laugh because this is not the way to do it. And I think you also tapped into the other fact that scarcity is at play. Okay, so suddenly you find out that everyone's buying things out. So I had a friend post how she went to Sam's Club and the entire area of toilet paper was totally cleared out. She said there's no diapers, no toilet paper. And so suddenly now you have to go get it. Okay, so we're trying to time out our grocery store run because we're afraid there's not enough milk out there because of that scarcity there. So outstanding answer. Other examples of liking or social proof, or even kind of tying it back to other things we've talked about.
I think, I don't know if this really goes along with it, but with contact, I used to work at an eye doctor, and we had like these certain type of sunglasses that were like really expensive, but they were really nice.
Okay.
So our opticians that would like sell the glasses, we would go out and pretty much be like, hey, you can try these on, like go ahead and take them outside, like look at the sun, like all these different things. And like if they did that, like the person was like more likely to buy it because like we would let them like go test it out and stuff.
That's a perfect example. So I know you're a bit hesitant with it, but that's exactly the idea behind it, is that the more they're in contact with it, the more they have it on their face, they test it out, the more likely they are to like that object. Okay, so I think about that same thing when I go to a good running store. They let me run around in their shoes. I take them out. I don't go for long runs, but I'll run around the parking lot like an idiot in these shoes. But because I'm getting into them now, I go, okay, I'm more likely to like them. Now it's a little bit different because I'm trying to find a good fit, but you have the right idea. Absolutely. Okay. Other examples. So again, as we're practicing with these things, talking about them, think of examples on your own. This is a great way to study. On the exam, you'll see me kind of give a lot of these examples, ask you to identify them. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about the next concept here, which is authority. And we'll go through this one a little bit quickly because we've worked with it a bit before already. And the idea with authority is that we're influenced by our deep-seated sense of duty to authority. And that's good. Like I said before, we want to follow authority figures. Okay? And there's genuine practical advantages to obeying authority because they tell us what to do, they keep things organized, Generally, they have more information than we do, so it's good to follow these authority figures. That's helpful. You want to follow your parents' advice because they're trying to guide you in the best way possible. I'll give kind of a silly example of this. Maybe it's more folklore than anything else. A mom took her child in to get because the child had an ear infection. The doctor then wrote a prescription and instructions that said "our ear," and the idea behind that was that they should put the drops in the child's right ear. But the mother read it as rear, as in the drop should be put in the child's rear. And so the mom starts to believe that's what she should be doing because the authority figure, the doctor, said that that's how it should be administered. Of course, it's kind of more a folklore, funny story a little bit here, but again, the idea that you should be following authority. Now, when we talk about authority, we can think about there's several factors that are going to influence this. And this is where you have to be very careful about whether someone's a genuine authority versus kind of trying to give a facade of an authority figure. Okay? So one of these might be titles. You'll see this happen in companies, organizations, where they'll sound like the person you're interacting with has this great title. Okay, so instead of base salesperson that just started, you'll see, sales associate of up-and-coming sales associate or something like that, where it sounds kind of fancier. One of the things I'll notice is that in certain professions, you can get qualifications. And with those qualifications, they basically end up being like a lot of letters after your name. And with titles, you can kind of adjust these to make it sound more or less important. So I can say, I'm James Worth, PhD. Okay, so that has authority behind it, but I can also make it sound like I'm a greater authority by saying James Worth, BA, MS, PhD, where also I'm starting to add kind of more elements to show that I've gotten more degrees. Okay, so again, you can kind of see this authority figure kind of come out. You see this with clothes. So individuals kind of dressing more as authority figure. One of the things I always do when I'm teaching is I always dress up. There's only been one time I've ever taught t-shirt and jeans, and that's because I was getting pies in the face, and that's a story for another day. So again, I want to look like I'm an appropriate authority figure. And we see this too with kind of ornamental possessions. So you look like you're an authority figure because you can demonstrate that you have these resources, the fancy car, that totally customized car, where you have, some type of badge. We see that sometimes with our research studies, we'll have our research assistants not dress up, but they'll wear a white lab coat. So they look like more of an authority figure because you're more likely to follow someone who wears these white lab coats. You're more likely to see this when you go to the doctor's office and things like that. Okay, so we see that we can have these authority figures. Again, we want to follow them, but in some cases, these authority figures are used to kind of then influence others in a way that maybe they don't have that legitimate authority figure. Okay? And the last one we'll talk about in terms of kind of base techniques is, again, this idea of obedience. We talked about this before with Milgram's experiment, where we talked about we're going to follow authority figures, we're going to be obedient to them. And in some cases, we'll see that we'll do things we normally wouldn't do in an effort to be obedient to that person. And so again, we got into all the different dimensions of participants were more likely to give shocks when that experimenter is telling them to continue, when that experimenter is seen as an authority figure. And so we see that that's where that obedience comes in. So any questions with authority or obedience? And I'll give you just kind of two last techniques before we'll get into how we defend against these techniques. Okay, so any examples, things I can go back through? I'll pause for just a second here. All right, so let's talk about two kind of last techniques that I just think are interesting, worthwhile noting. They don't squarely fall into anything we talked about, but I think they're interesting ones. Okay? The first is this idea of what's called pick technique. In this case, you're going to capture people's attention by making a novel request. So the example here is that, can you spare 17 cents? We've all gotten very used to this idea of others asking, hey, can you spare some change? Can I have a quarter or something like that? But no one's really asked you to spare 17 cents. It's kind of just a different way of asking about things. And you can see this happening again with kind of marketing, where they'll say, they'll kind of pitch you a product in a different way that you haven't seen before. It might be that you're making a request that you haven't seen. So instead of maybe this foot in the door, maybe they give you that outlandish request, knowing that, this door in the face. They give you outlandish request, not because they actually want you to reciprocate with the behavior, but because it's a kind of a different way of asking. So it captures people's attention. And that's the biggest piece with this pick technique, is that somehow you're getting people's attention. So if they then see the request, they see this novel, and they're more likely to follow along with it. We also see this too, kind of a similar process with what's called disrupt and reframe. An idea here is that one disrupts critical thinking by introducing an unexpected element and then reframes the message in a positive light. Okay, so I'll read that for you again. Disrupt and then reframe. This technique involves one disrupting critical thinking by introducing an unexpected element and then reframing the message in a more positive light. Okay, so you might get asked, do you want a half cake versus cupcakes? Okay, so cupcakes we've been asked before. Okay, so hey, do you want to buy a cupcake? Maybe it's a bake sale drive. Maybe it's just a simple request, but you can also frame those as a half cake potentially. So someone says, hey, do you want a half cake? Suddenly you're trying to figure out what they mean by a half cake, and then they come back with some kind of message trying to influence you, saying that they're delicious. Because you're disoriented, because you start to use your cognitive thought processes, you're not then braced for the fact that they're going to make that request of you. Okay, so that's where we'll see in just a moment we get into influence, or how we defend against influence tactics. Part of what it is that you have to be able to stop and think. This technique is intentionally keeping you from being able to think about the message that they're giving because they're confusing you a little bit. Okay. You see this sometimes in TV commercials where they'll kind of give you some kind of weird story, or like characters are flying around on the screen and you're not quite sure what's going on, and you're putting your effort into that, and then suddenly they deliver this message of, hey, buy this product, it's fun. Okay? Because you're still trying to understand the first part of the message, you're using those resources there, you're not paying attention to the fact that now they've slid in this influence technique that is going to hopefully cause you to then buy their product or be interested in their product. Okay, so this disrupting, again, breaks away this critical thinking where it makes you kind of then more malleable to different influences. So we've now gotten to kind of through the first part of talking about each of the different techniques. I want to take a moment here to kind of pause, answer any questions, check in with you guys. Again, it's a little harder to do online, so jump in with questions. Before we'll do is we'll spend the last bit of our time talking about how we defend against these techniques. Okay, so let me pause here to kind of get any kind of collective questions, things like that, for things that we talked about, and then we'll get into talking about defending against these techniques. Okay, and if you're all good, go ahead and send me kind of a message saying that you're all set. So let me pause, make sure we're good to go before we move on to our next block.
Dr. Worth, are these last two techniques just above and beyond the 6 weapons of social influence then?
Yeah, I would kind of argue that they may fit within some of those things we've talked about, but I think we kind of pull them out just because they are kind of distinct and they don't necessarily fall exactly in one of the categories, but they are still an influence technique. And we'll see how they actually kind of rely a little bit more on kind of cognitive thinking. And so I'll highlight that in just a moment. So it's a little bit more, if there's a 7th weapon, it would be disrupting cognitive thinking and then making a request. So great question. I'm glad you asked that. All right. So let's go ahead. It seems like we're set. The feedback I'm getting, you guys. And what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about, well, what do we do to defend against these tactics?